Sarah Martinez stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic, the desert heat hitting her face like a slap. The small Arizona town looked like something from an old Western movie, with dusty streets and buildings that had seen better days. She pulled her baseball cap lower over her eyes and grabbed her backpack from the passenger seat. 3 months ago, she had been Lieutenant Sarah Martinez of the U.S. Army Special Forces. Today, she was just another drifter looking for work and trying to disappear. The gas station attendant barely looked up when she walked in. Sarah bought a bottle of water and some crackers, paying with crumpled bills from her pocket. She had been driving for 2 days straight, running on coffee and determination. The nightmares were getting worse, and staying in one place too long made her feel trapped. The desert seemed like a good place to get lost, to figure out what came next. As she walked back to her car, Sarah noticed the black SUVs parked across the street. 3 of them windows tinted dark, engines running despite the heat. Her military training kicked in automatically. She memorized the license plates, noted the positions, counted the shadows she could see inside the vehicles. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had kept her alive in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Sarah had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. She had led missions that never made it into any official reports, the kind of operations that happened in the shadows where regular soldiers never went. Her team had been the best of the best, specialists in reconnaissance, extraction, and elimination of high-value targets. She had earned her rank through blood, sweat, and a willingness to do whatever it took to bring her people home alive. But that was before everything went wrong, before the mission that changed everything, before she found herself discharged and struggling to find her place in a world that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. The Army had been her life for 8 years, and now she was adrift, carrying skills that had no place in civilian life and memories that haunted her sleep. The SUVs started moving as she reached her car. Sarah pretended to check her phone while watching them in her peripheral vision. They were following her, staying just close enough to keep her in sight. She had been running for 3 weeks now, ever since she had stumbled onto something she was not supposed to see, something that powerful people wanted to keep buried. Sarah started her engine and pulled out of the gas station, heading toward the mountains she could see in the distance. The SUVs fell into formation behind her, maintaining their distance but never losing sight of her car. She knew this game well. She had played it in Kabul and Baghdad, hunting targets through crowded streets and empty countryside. The difference was that now she was the one being hunted. The road stretched ahead of her, empty except for the occasional truck hauling goods across the desert. Sarah checked her fuel gauge and calculated distances in her head. She had maybe an hour before she would need to stop again. An hour to figure out how to lose 3 vehicles full of trained professionals who clearly knew what they were doing. As the miles passed, Sarah thought about the events that had led her to this moment. It had started 6 months ago when she was still in the service. Her commanding officer had given her what seemed like a routine assignment: investigate reports of missing military equipment from a base in Nevada. Simple inventory work, or so it had seemed at the time. But what Sarah had found was not missing equipment. What she had found was a systematic operation to sell military weapons to private contractors who had no business owning them. High-powered rifles, night vision equipment, even explosives were being sold to the highest bidder. And the people running the operation had connections that went all the way to the Pentagon. Sarah had tried to report her findings through proper channels. She had followed protocol, filed reports, requested meetings with her superiors. But instead of launching an investigation, the Army had suddenly found reasons to question her mental fitness for duty. Stress from combat operations, they said, post-traumatic stress disorder. She needed treatment, not field assignments. Within 3 months, Sarah had found herself with an honorable discharge and a strong suggestion that she keep her mouth shut about what she had discovered. The message was clear: walk away, stay quiet, and everyone would be happy. Try to make trouble and things would get very unpleasant very quickly. But Sarah Martinez had not become a Special Forces officer by backing down from fights. She had made copies of everything she had found, hidden them in safe places, and started making contact with journalists and congressional investigators who might be interested in the truth. That was when the surveillance had started. That was when she realized that some secrets were worth killing to protect. The SUVs were getting closer now, and Sarah could see more vehicles joining them from side roads. They were not trying to hide anymore. Whatever was going to happen, it was going to happen soon. Sarah reached into her backpack and felt the weight of the pistol she carried there. She had hoped it would not come to this, but hope was a luxury she could not afford. The road ahead curved through a series of low hills covered in scrub brush and rocks. Sarah knew this was where they would make their move. The terrain offered cover and concealment, and there would be no witnesses if things went wrong. She pressed down on the accelerator and felt her car surge forward. If they wanted a chase, she would give them one they would remember. As her speedometer climbed past 80 miles per hour, Sarah began to smile for the first time in weeks. These people had made a serious mistake. They thought they were hunting a frightened ex-soldier who was in over her head. They had no idea that they were about to tangle with someone who had spent years perfecting the art of warfare. They were about to learn why you never underestimate a Special Forces veteran who has nothing left to lose. The first shot shattered Sarah's rear window just as she crested the hill. Glass fragments peppered the back of her head, but she kept driving, weaving between the rocky outcroppings that dotted the landscape. The SUVs had spread out behind her, trying to box her in, but Sarah had advantages they did not expect. She knew how to read terrain, how to use geography as a weapon, and how to disappear when disappearing meant survival. Sarah yanked her steering wheel hard to the right, sending her car sliding down a steep embankment toward a dry creek bed. The Honda bounced and scraped against rocks, but it held together. Behind her, the larger SUVs hesitated at the edge of the embankment, their drivers clearly unwilling to risk damaging their vehicles on the rough terrain. That hesitation gave Sarah the opening she needed. She gunned the engine and followed the creek bed as it wound between the hills, putting distance between herself and her pursuers. But she knew the respite was temporary. They would find other ways down, and they had the advantage of numbers and firepower. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and saw a number she did not recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Miss Martinez," a calm male voice said, "I think it's time we talked." "I'm listening," Sarah replied, keeping her eyes on the rough terrain ahead of her. "My name is Director Collins. I work for a government agency that you have inadvertently inconvenienced with your recent activities. We would very much like to resolve this situation peacefully." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Peacefully? Your people just shot at me." "Those individuals are not under my direct control," Collins said. "They represent certain private interests that would prefer a more permanent solution to our current problem. I, on the other hand, believe that reasonable people can reach reasonable agreements." "What kind of agreement?" Sarah asked, navigating around a boulder that blocked most of the creek bed. "The kind where you return certain materials that do not belong to you, and in exchange, you receive a very comfortable retirement package and the guarantee that no one will bother you ever again." Sarah spotted a narrow canyon ahead that might offer better cover. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'm afraid I won't be able to protect you from my more aggressive colleagues much longer." The creek bed ended abruptly at the mouth of the canyon. Sarah drove her car as far into the narrow space as possible, then grabbed her backpack and abandoned the vehicle. The canyon walls rose 50 feet on either side, creating a natural fortress that would be difficult to assault. But it was also a dead end, with only one way in or out. Sarah climbed up the rocky wall until she found a ledge that gave her a good view of the canyon mouth. She pulled out her pistol and checked the magazine. 15 rounds. She also had 2 spare magazines in her pack, which meant 45 bullets total. It would have to be enough. The first SUV appeared at the canyon entrance 20 minutes later. Sarah watched through her pistol sights as armed men in tactical gear climbed out and began to advance cautiously into the canyon. She counted 6 of them, all carrying assault rifles and moving with the practiced coordination of professional soldiers. But these were not the elite troops that Sarah had trained with. These were private military contractors, mercenaries who fought for money rather than country or principle. They were good, but they had gotten lazy working jobs where they had overwhelming advantages in equipment and numbers. They were not prepared for someone who could match their training while fighting with the desperation of someone who had nothing to lose. Sarah let them advance until they were halfway into the canyon before she opened fire. Her first shot took down the lead man with a clean hit to the chest. Her second and third shots scattered the others, sending them diving for cover behind rocks and debris. "Martinez," one of them shouted, "you're surrounded, give up now and nobody else has to get hurt." "I'm Special Forces, you idiots," Sarah shouted back. "You think 6 mercenaries are going to intimidate me?" She changed position, moving along the canyon wall to a spot where she could see one of the men crouched behind a rock. She waited for him to expose himself and then put a bullet through his shoulder. sending him screaming to the ground. The remaining 4 contractors began laying down suppressing fire, filling the air with bullets that ricocheted off the canyon walls. Sarah pressed herself against the rock face and waited for them to exhaust their ammunition. When the firing stopped, she popped up and sent 2 more shots downrange, forcing them back into cover. Her phone rang again. Director Collins. "Miss Martinez, this is not going well for anyone involved." "Seems to be going pretty well from where I'm sitting," Sarah replied, keeping her eyes on the canyon mouth. "I have 12 more men arriving in the next 10 minutes. You cannot win a prolonged engagement." "Maybe not," Sarah admitted, "but I can make it expensive for you." "What do you want?" Sarah had been thinking about this moment for weeks. "I want a congressional hearing, full investigation into the weapons trafficking operation, complete immunity for my testimony." "Impossible. Too many important people would be embarrassed." "Then we have a problem." Sarah heard vehicles approaching from outside the canyon. More contractors, just as Collins had promised. She was about to be outnumbered 3-1, trapped in a dead-end canyon with limited ammunition. By any reasonable military assessment, her situation was hopeless. But Sarah Martinez had been in hopeless situations before. In Afghanistan, she had held off an entire Taliban company with just her sidearm and a handful of grenades until air support arrived. In Iraq, she had infiltrated a heavily guarded compound and extracted a captured CIA operative while under fire from multiple directions. The difference was that in those situations, she had been fighting for her country and her fellow soldiers. This time, she was fighting for something more personal. She was fighting for the truth, for justice, and for the right to expose corruption that threatened the very institution she had served with pride. As the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, Sarah began to implement a plan that she had been developing since the moment she drove into the canyon. It was risky, probably suicidal, but it was also the kind of unconventional thinking that had made her successful in special forces operations around the world. Sarah opened her backpack and pulled out the one item she had been saving for exactly this kind of situation. It was a small device that looked like an ordinary cell phone, but it was actually something much more dangerous. Something she had acquired during her investigation into the weapons trafficking operation, and something that the people hunting her would do anything to prevent from being activated. She held the device up where the contractors below could see it. "Tell Collins I want to renegotiate," she shouted. The device in Sarah's hand was an encrypted transmitter capable of uploading terabytes of data to multiple servers around the world in less than 30 seconds. She had spent months setting up the network, creating redundant systems that would ensure the information she had gathered would reach journalists, congressional investigators, and government watchdog groups simultaneously. The evidence she possessed would destroy careers, end political ambitions, and send dozens of people to federal prison. "Collins," Sarah shouted, "I know you can hear me. Look at what I'm holding." The shooting stopped. Even from her position high on the canyon wall, Sarah could see the contractors below talking urgently into their radios. Whatever Collins was telling them, it was making them very nervous. Her phone rang again. "Miss Martinez, please don't do anything rash," Collins said, and for the first time she could hear genuine concern in his voice. "Rash?" Sarah laughed. "You mean like uploading 40 gigabytes of classified documents to WikiLeaks, or sending detailed financial records to the Washington Post, or maybe sharing intercepted communications with the Senate Intelligence Committee?" "You're bluffing." "Am I? Do you want to test that theory?" Sarah heard Collins talking to someone else, voices muffled but urgent. When he came back on the line, his tone had changed completely. "What do you want?" "I told you, congressional hearing, full investigation, complete immunity." "And if we agree to these terms?" "Then the evidence stays buried, for now." There was a long pause. Sarah used the time to scan the canyon below her. The contractors had taken defensive positions, but they were no longer advancing. Whatever Collins was telling them had put them on hold. "Miss Martinez, I need you to understand something," Collins finally said. "The operation you uncovered was not sanctioned by any legitimate government agency. It was a rogue operation run by private individuals who happened to have access to military resources." "That's interesting," Sarah said, "because the financial records I have show payments coming directly from Pentagon black budget accounts." Another long pause. Those accounts were compromised by people who had legitimate access to them, Collins said. People who used their positions to enrich themselves at the expense of national security. People like General Morrison, Colonel Stevens, Senator Patterson. I'm not going to discuss specific individuals over an open phone line. Sarah smiled. The fact that Collins had not denied her accusations told her everything she needed to know. The corruption went even higher than she had suspected, reaching into the highest levels of the military and political establishment. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said. I'm going to walk out of this canyon. Your people are going to let me pass. Then I'm going to drive to the nearest FBI field office and turn myself in for protection. If anything happens to me between now and then, everything I have gets released automatically. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this works. Unless you want to explain to your superiors how you let a discharged Army lieutenant bring down half the Pentagon. Sarah could hear vehicles moving outside the canyon. It sounded like more people were arriving, but she could not tell if they were reinforcements for the contractors or someone else entirely. Miss Martinez, Collins said, I'm afraid the situation has become more complicated. What do you mean? Some of the people involved in this operation have decided that the risk of exposure is too great. They've authorized what they call a permanent solution to our problem. Sarah felt her blood run cold. You're talking about assassination. I'm talking about people who have too much to lose to let this go public. People who view you as an existential threat to their freedom and their fortunes. The sound of gunfire erupted from outside the canyon, but it was not directed at Sarah's position. Someone was shooting at the contractors below her. Sarah watched in amazement as the mercenaries abandoned their positions and began retreating toward the canyon mouth, only to be met by incoming fire from multiple directions. Collins, what's happening out there? Federal agents, Miss Martinez. It appears that someone else has been monitoring this situation and decided to intervene. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching. Military helicopters, from the sound of them. She pressed herself against the canyon wall as two Black Hawks appeared overhead, their door gunners scanning the area below. Miss Martinez, this is Agent Thompson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A voice called from a loudspeaker mounted on one of the helicopters. We are here to provide assistance and protection. Please identify your position. Sarah emerged from behind the rock where she had been hiding and waved her arms above her head. One of the helicopters immediately began descending toward her position, while the other continued circling the canyon. Collins, Sarah said into her phone, it looks like your people just lost control of this situation. Miss Martinez, I want you to listen to me very carefully, Collins said. The men who are hunting you represent interests that will not stop just because the FBI has intervened. They have resources and connections that go beyond what any federal agency can protect you from. Your only chance of survival is to make a deal with me. What kind of deal? Give me the evidence, all of it. In exchange, I will ensure that you disappear completely. New identity, new life, complete protection from anyone who might want to harm you. The FBI helicopter had landed on a flat area near the canyon mouth, and Sarah could see agents in tactical gear advancing into the canyon to secure the area. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just her investigation into weapons trafficking. Why would you make that offer? Sarah asked. Because the evidence you have could destabilize more than just a few careers. It could compromise ongoing operations that are vital to national security. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. Sarah began making her way down from the canyon wall, moving carefully over the rocky terrain. And if I refuse? Then you will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never knowing who you can trust or when someone might decide that you know too much. As Sarah reached the canyon floor, she could see FBI agents securing the contractors who had been hunting her. Several of them were wounded, and at least 2 appeared to be dead. The federal intervention had been swift and decisive, suggesting that someone with significant authority had decided to end this situation once and for all. Miss Martinez, Agent Thompson approached her, his weapon lowered but ready. Are you injured? I'm fine, Sarah said, but I think we need to talk. Yes, we do, Thompson agreed. There are people in Washington who are very interested in what you've discovered. Sarah's phone was still connected to Collins, and she could hear him talking urgently to someone else. Whatever plan he had been implementing was clearly not going according to schedule. "Collins," Sarah said into the phone, "I think our conversation just became irrelevant. Miss Martinez, please reconsider. The FBI cannot protect you from everyone who wants you silenced." "Maybe not," Sarah said, "but they can help me make sure the truth comes out." She ended the call and handed her phone to Agent Thompson. "I think you're going to want to see what's on here," she said. As the FBI agents began processing the scene and securing evidence, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had survived the immediate threat, but she knew that Collins had been telling the truth about one thing. The people behind the weapons trafficking operation had too much to lose to simply give up. This was just the beginning of a much larger battle. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in a sterile conference room in the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C., surrounded by federal agents, congressional investigators, and attorneys from the Department of Justice. The evidence she had collected was spread across multiple computer screens and file folders that covered every inch of the large table. Special Agent Thompson had proven to be exactly what Sarah needed: a federal investigator who was not connected to any of the players in the weapons trafficking operation, and who had the authority to pursue the case wherever it led. The FBI had placed Sarah in protective custody immediately after the Canyon incident, moving her to a series of safe houses while they verified her evidence and built their case. "Miss Martinez," Congressman Bradley said, leaning forward across the table, "your testimony has been extraordinary, but I need to ask you directly. Are you certain about the identity of the people involved in this operation?" Sarah looked at the photographs spread out in front of her. General Morrison, who had commanded the base where the weapons were being stolen. Colonel Stevens, who had falsified inventory reports to cover the thefts. Senator Patterson, who had used his position on the Armed Services Committee to ensure that certain investigations were quietly dropped. 3 men whose careers were built on honor and service to their country, now revealed as criminals who had betrayed everything they claimed to represent. "I'm certain," Sarah said. "I have financial records showing payments from defense contractors to offshore accounts controlled by these men. I have intercepted communications detailing how the weapons were being stolen and sold. I have video evidence of military equipment being loaded onto trucks that were supposed to be carrying humanitarian supplies." "And you obtained this evidence how?" asked Attorney Jenkins from the DOJ. Sarah had been dreading this question. The truth was that much of her evidence had been obtained through methods that were not exactly legal. She had hacked into computer systems, intercepted communications, and conducted surveillance operations without proper warrants or authorization. In the process of exposing criminals, she had become one herself. "I used skills that I learned in Special Forces training," Sarah said carefully. "Electronic surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence gathering." "Skills that you used without proper legal authority," Jenkins pressed. "Skills that I used to uncover a conspiracy that was stealing weapons from the U.S. military and selling them to private contractors who were using them in conflicts around the world," Sarah replied. "If I had tried to go through proper channels, this operation would still be running." Agent Thompson spoke up from his position at the end of the table. "Miss Martinez attempted to report her findings through military channels. Instead of launching an investigation, her superiors questioned her mental fitness and arranged for her discharge. She had every reason to believe that the proper channels had been compromised." Sarah was grateful for Thompson's support, but she knew that the legal situation was complicated. The evidence she had gathered was compelling, but much of it might not be admissible in court if it had been obtained illegally. The men she was accusing had expensive lawyers and powerful connections. They would use every possible legal maneuver to avoid prosecution. "What we need," Congressman Bradley said, "is corroborating evidence that was obtained through legal means. Something that confirms Miss Martinez's findings but can stand up in court." "We're working on that," Thompson said. "Based on Miss Martinez's information, we've obtained proper warrants to search the financial records of the suspects. We've also launched an investigation into the military bases where the thefts occurred." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly, expecting to see something from one of the FBI agents assigned to her protection detail. Instead, she saw a message from an unknown number. "You should have taken the deal. Last warning." Sarah showed the message to Thompson, who immediately began making calls to security personnel. Within minutes, Additional agents had arrived to escort Sarah to a different location while technicians traced the source of the threatening message. "Miss Martinez," Thompson said as they walked through the corridors of the FBI building, "we've been monitoring communications from the suspects in your case. There have been several conversations about ways to discredit your testimony and evidence." "What kind of conversations?" "Discussions about your military service record, your mental health evaluations, your personal life. They're looking for anything they can use to make you appear unstable or unreliable." Sarah was not surprised. She had expected this kind of attack from the moment she decided to go public with her evidence. What worried her was the text message. It suggested that despite FBI protection, the people she was fighting still had ways to reach her. They arrived at a new safe house in a suburban area outside Washington. It was a nondescript two-story house that could have belonged to any middle-class family, but Sarah noticed the sophisticated security equipment and the armed agents positioned around the property. "How long do I have to stay here?" Sarah asked. "Until the hearings are concluded and we've made arrests," Thompson said. "It might be several more weeks." Sarah nodded, but she was already thinking about the long-term implications of her situation. Even if the investigation was successful, even if the criminals were prosecuted and convicted, she would never be completely safe. There would always be other people with secrets to protect, other conspiracies to expose, other powerful individuals who viewed her as a threat. That evening, Sarah was reviewing documents in the safe house when Agent Thompson arrived with news that changed everything. "Miss Martinez, we've had a breakthrough," he said, setting a laptop computer on the kitchen table. "One of the suspects has agreed to cooperate." "Which one?" "Colonel Stevens. He's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity from prosecution." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and frustration. Stevens had been one of the key players in the weapons trafficking operation, but he was also the least powerful of the three main suspects. His testimony would be valuable, but it might not be enough to bring down the bigger fish. "What is he offering?" "Everything. Financial records, communication logs, details about how the operation worked and who was involved. He's even willing to wear a wire and record conversations with the other suspects." Thompson opened the laptop and began playing an audio recording. Sarah recognized Stevens' voice immediately, but the person he was talking to was someone she had never heard before. "The Martinez woman has to be stopped," the unknown voice said. "Her testimony could bring down the entire network." "I understand that," Stevens replied, "but killing a federal witness is not something we can arrange easily." "We're not talking about killing her. We're talking about discrediting her, making her appear unstable, unreliable, possibly even delusional." Sarah felt her stomach clench as she listened to the conversation. These people were planning to destroy her reputation, her credibility, possibly her sanity. They were going to use her military service record against her, claim that she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, suggest that her accusations were the product of a damaged mind rather than careful investigation. "Who is the other person on the recording?" Sarah asked. "We're still working on that," Thompson said. "But based on some of the things he says, we believe he's connected to intelligence agencies, possibly CIA or NSA." The implications of that revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had thought she was fighting corruption within the military and defense contracting. Now it appeared that the conspiracy reached into the intelligence community as well, involving people with access to resources and capabilities that went far beyond anything she had imagined. "Agent Thompson," Sarah said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Go ahead." "Do you think I'm going to survive this?" Thompson was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering his response carefully. "Miss Martinez, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe, but you're right to be concerned. The people you're fighting have resources and connections that most criminals don't have. They're not going to give up easily." Sarah nodded. She had known from the beginning that this path was dangerous, possibly suicidal. But she had also known that walking away was not an option. Too many people had died because of the weapons that were being stolen and sold. Too many soldiers had been put at risk because of the corruption in their own ranks. "Then we better make sure this investigation succeeds," Sarah said, "because if it doesn't, a lot more people are going to get hurt." As Thompson left the safe house that night, Sarah stood at the window watching the street outside. Somewhere out there, powerful people were making plans to destroy her life and bury the truth she had uncovered. But Sarah Martinez was not the same person who had driven into the desert 3 weeks ago. She was no longer running from a fight. She was preparing for war. The congressional hearing room was packed with reporters, congressional staff, and observers from various government agencies. Sarah sat at the witness table, her right hand raised as she swore to tell the truth. 6 months had passed since the confrontation in the Arizona Canyon, and the investigation had grown far beyond anything she had originally imagined. Colonel Stevens had provided prosecutors with evidence that led to arrests across 3 different government agencies. General Morrison had been found dead in his study 3 days before he was scheduled to testify, officially ruled a suicide, but widely suspected to be something else entirely. Senator Patterson had fled the country and was fighting extradition from a nation with no extradition treaty with the United States. Miss Martinez, Congressman Bradley began, you have stated that this weapons trafficking operation resulted in the deaths of American soldiers. Can you elaborate on that claim? Sarah looked at the photographs that had been placed on easels around the room. Faces of young men and women who had died in Iraq and Afghanistan, killed by weapons that should have been protecting them instead of being used against them. The weapons that were stolen from U.S. military bases were sold to private contractors, who then resold them to various groups throughout the Middle East, Sarah testified. Some of those weapons ended up in the hands of insurgent groups who used them against American forces. She pointed to one of the photographs. Staff Sergeant Maria Lopez was killed by an IED that was detonated using a timer device stolen from Fort Braxton. Lieutenant James Wilson was shot by a sniper using a rifle that was supposed to have been destroyed according to military records, but was actually sold to a contractor in Dubai. The room was completely silent as Sarah continued her testimony. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with FBI investigators and congressional staff to ensure that every detail was accurate and every claim was supported by evidence. The financial records we recovered show that this operation generated over $40 million in illegal profits over a 3-year period, Sarah continued. That money was divided among military officers, defense contractors, and political figures who used their positions to facilitate and protect the operation. During the lunch break, Agent Thompson approached Sarah in the hallway outside the hearing room. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm okay," Sarah said. "Just glad this is almost over." "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," Thompson said. "We've received intelligence that suggests this might not be over quite yet." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of intelligence?" "Intercepted communications between some of the people who were involved in the operation, but who haven't been arrested yet. They're discussing something called Operation Clean Slate." "Which is what?" "We're not sure, but it seems to involve eliminating loose ends, people who could still cause problems for those who managed to avoid prosecution." Sarah understood immediately. She was a loose end. As long as she was alive and able to testify, she represented a continuing threat to people who thought they had escaped justice. "What are you recommending?" Sarah asked. "Witness protection, complete relocation, new identity, round-the-clock security until we can identify and arrest the remaining conspirators." Sarah had been dreading this conversation. Witness protection meant giving up her real name, her family, her friends, everything that connected her to her previous life. It meant living in hiding, possibly forever, never knowing if someone had discovered her new identity and location. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, but don't take too long. We have reason to believe they're planning to move soon." That afternoon, Sarah concluded her testimony with a statement she had written during the lunch break. "When I enlisted in the Army, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic," she said, looking directly at the television cameras that were broadcasting the hearing live. "The men who participated in this conspiracy were domestic enemies of everything our military stands for. They betrayed their fellow soldiers, they compromised national security, and they profited from the deaths of the people they were supposed to protect." She paused, gathering her thoughts for what she knew might be her final public statement. "I know that testifying here today has made me a target for people who want to keep their crimes hidden. I know that there are powerful individuals who view me as a threat to be eliminated rather than a witness to be protected. But I also know that silence in the face of corruption is complicity. If we allow criminals to hide behind their rank and connections, then we betray every soldier who has ever served with honor. The hearing room erupted in applause that lasted for several minutes. Sarah felt a sense of completion, of having done everything she could to expose the truth and seek justice for the people who had been harmed by the conspiracy. But as she walked out of the hearing room, Sarah also felt a sense of loss. She knew that her life as Sarah Martinez was effectively over. Whatever came next, whatever identity she adopted, whatever new life she built, it would be fundamentally different from everything she had known before. 3 days later, Sarah sat in a nondescript government office, signing paperwork that would make her disappear from official records. Agent Thompson sat across from her, finalizing the details of her new identity. "Your new name will be Catherine Wells," he said. "You'll be relocated to a small town in Oregon where the local law enforcement has been briefed on your situation." "What about my family?" Sarah asked. "They've been told that you died in a car accident. We'll provide them with counseling and support, but for their safety and yours, you can never contact them again." Sarah signed the final document and handed it back to Thompson. As far as the world was concerned, Sarah Martinez was dead. Catherine Wells would live quietly in Oregon, working as a consultant for a small security firm, always watching for signs that her past had caught up with her. But as Sarah walked out of the government building for the last time, she carried with her the knowledge that she had done something important. The weapons trafficking conspiracy had been exposed. Criminals had been arrested and prosecuted. The families of soldiers who had been killed by stolen weapons finally knew the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. 6 months later, Catherine Wells received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about the final conviction in the weapons trafficking case, along with a handwritten note. "The truth has consequences. Thank you for having the courage to tell it." Catherine never learned who sent the package, but she kept the note in a frame on her desk. It reminded her that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that require you to sacrifice everything for a principle. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing that you stood up for what was right, even when standing up meant losing everything you had. As she looked out the window of her small house in Oregon, Catherine reflected on the choices that had brought her to this moment. She had lost her name, her family, her career, and her life as she had known it. But she had also helped expose a conspiracy that had cost soldiers their lives and threatened national security. In the quiet of her new life, Catherine Wells knew that Sarah Martinez had made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. Some truths were worth telling, even if telling them meant you could never go home again. The rifle that had been aimed at her head in that Arizona canyon had belonged to men who thought they could silence the truth through intimidation and violence. They had learned too late that they were dealing with someone who understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what was right despite being afraid. Sarah Martinez was gone, but her legacy lived on in the prosecutions she had made possible, the corruption she had exposed, and the reminder that even the most powerful conspiracies could be brought down by one person with the courage to stand up and tell the truth.